It's not just about the house looking good, it's also making sure that the upgrades actually improve. Welcome back, everybody. Today we're talking about functional design versus aesthetic design. I know this comes up a lot of times, and what I would say to that is you should have the best of both worlds. And so when we think about aesthetics, those are the sleek colors that you choose. In my villa, we have the bold black and white contrast, whether it be with the cradle door, the lighting, the marble that we bought, and even the lighting. And so you can see black and white lighting, the handrails. There's obviously a difference between renovating for aesthetics versus, functional. For me, you want to get the luxury look when it comes to aesthetics. That's important. And that's where your personality comes in. That shouldn't be the only thing, right? And so here's some more aesthetics. It's not just about the house looking good. It's also making sure that the upgrades actually improve how you use the space. One great example of that is the island. And so it's beautiful, large island. It's gonna have a wonderful porcelain countertop. And it is a centerpiece, but it's also, and here's the functionality of it, it's also designed for purpose, right? Which is storage. We're looking to ensure that we have extra storage and we can be efficient. And so deep island, but we have deep storage options for pots and pans, an area to have a pull-out for garbage and recycling. When you're planning a renovation, you really should be asking yourself, is it just for looks or also daily life uses? And I think you need a little bit of both, when you're going through the process. And we've done that in several areas. I wouldn't say just the kitchen. We've thought about that consistently. Another area for functionality is, proper use of space. And so we tried to do that in this area where it used to be just a closet and we expanded it. It opens up the space, but it's also an area that allowed us to expand some of these drawers that we wouldn't have had beforehand. So let's be real. A home isn't just about having something nice to look at. It's also about utilization and using the space to the best of your ability. And I think another way we, renovated for functionality is this space here, which was the extension area. So we added about 100 square feet on the ground floor because it was already an overhang. It makes so much more sense, in our living space. So I think that's another area where you blend aesthetics, which is having a much larger space to look at, and functionality, a living space that we can actually now use in the future. These are definitely things to consider when you're doing your renovation. So another way that I think the kitchen remains functional for use purposes is you want to remove all the clutter. And so you need to have a good amount of storage. And I think we did a good job with that. And not just opening up the space and making it look really sleek and having that nice modern farmhouse look, but we also declutter, right, with that extra storage. And we just made sure that, one of the biggest challenges that I had before we renovated the kitchen was we just never had enough refrigerator storage. So having a double fridge here really, I think, is a huge benefit for our family. And so I think that was another great way of making sure that we had a good functional design for our needs. Also, the other thing too is the freezer. So we got a double freezer at the bottom. And I feel like there's never enough storage in your freezer. Sometimes and that's another thing too, I would say, is if you can add an additional separate standalone freezer into your design, if you have the space, that's also something to consider, especially if you have a large family. And here's another thing I would say about functional versus aesthetics and mixing the two. So one of the things that I really liked is making sure that we get the best use of our kitchen, with the kids, and having it also act as a separate living space. And I think we did that here with the island. So oversized island, great, aesthetically pleasing, sleek, very nice, right? And a centerpiece, but we're also having separate seating area along the back of the island that we'll use. So we'll have, 3 chairs over here, and so that the kids can use it. So large, beautiful, an area that you could probably use for prepping when you want to cook, but also a great breakfast area here for the kids and the family when we want to use it in the morning. And also here, this is also a separate little nook area that we can use for seating, and so that your face feels more lived in, right? And so for me, that was also an important element. So when you're doing renovation, don't just think about how nice something looks, whether it's visually pleasing. You just want to make sure that it's also functional, and to the best of your abilities, make sure you mix that. And then one final point that I would highlight when we consider functional versus aesthetics, I think the cradle door is a good example of that. Aesthetically, we wanted something that looked nice, so we had a nice design, but I also think that it acts in a very functional way. And what I mean by that is, instead of having an open kitchen, we created segregation in our living area, and I think that's functional too, whether it be you don't want the smells of the kitchen to overflow in the house and you want some separation of noise, or the ability to have an extra space for people to use. So I think that's one element. The other element, the actual doors. So easy to open and gain access to the kitchen, but we had a double door. If we want to open that up and we don't want separation, we also have that option, right? And look at the difference, when we open it up. Again, functional if we want to bring things in, or if we're having people over and we want the space to feel open, we have that option. I think that's another really good design element that we really considered when we were designing the kitchen and figuring out what we wanted to do. So keep that in mind in your design.